All right, friends. So this week we are covering the rotator cuff muscles. The rotator cuff is, you'll hear clients say it all the time, like, I tore my rotator cuff, like that's a thing. The rotator cuff is not a structure, it is a muscle group. There are 4 muscles in this group that we're going to be covering today. First things first, though, I do just kind of want to recap quickly the muscles that we covered last week. Who can tell me something about the deltoid that we remember? What do we remember about the deltoid?
It's shaped like a teardrop, but it's not actually a teardrop. It's more of a triangle that's weirdly shaped.
Good. What else do we know?
It has 7 antagonist to itself.
It is an antagonist to itself.
It has
Somebody else
7
was saying something. 7 actions. So what were the actions of the deltoid?
Oh, are you asking me?
general.
All fibers, AB duct.
All fibers, AB duct. Very good.
Anterior fibers medially rotate.
Good. Medially rotate.
And they do other things too. They extend or flex.
Flex.
And also horizontally adduct.
Horizontally adduct. Very good.
Okay.
What about our posterior deltoid fibers?
Or should I do that, or someone else wants to do it?
You've got the mic, Em.
Oh gosh, okay. The posterior fibers do all those 3 things, but the opposite. So lateral rotation, extension,
Very good.
and horizontal abduct.
Excellent. Very, very good. Very good. What's the origin of the deltoid? Anybody?
Lateral 1/3 clavicle, the acromion, and spine of the scapula.
Beautifully done. Anyone want to jump in with the insertion?
The deltoid tuberosity.
Deltoid tuberosity. Awesome. Pectoralis major. What was the origin?
The upper fibers, the medial half of the clavicle.
Medial half of the clavicle. What else?
The sternum.
Sternum.
Last 3 to 4 ribs.
Last 3 to 4 ribs. What is the insertion?
Crest of the greater tubercle of the humerus.
Crest of the greater tubercle of the humerus. So we've got this very broad origin and a single narrow insertion. So what actions does this muscle perform?
Adduction of the glenohumeral joint.
Good.
All
So
fibers.
adduction.
Yeah.
Yes. So adduction.
The medial rotation of the
medial rotation.
The flexion of the glenohumeral joint.
Flexion.
And then the horizontal adduction of the. Yeah. So can you explain? So is that like just going like this? Okay.
Yep. Horizontal adduction is when this bone is horizontal, right? So the elbow can be bent or whatever, but this bone, horizontal AD, horizontal abduction.
Okay. And then extension of the joint to neutral.
Yes. So once the joint is flexed, now the lower fibers can pull down into extension, but only until the arm is back down by the side. Then that muscle is done. It cannot push, right? It can only pull down. Muscles only pull. That is their only trick ever. Good job. What about teres major? Origin of teres major.
The inferior angle of the scapula.
Inferior angle of the scapula. There's a little bit more.
Lateral border.
Yeah.
There we go. Lower third of the lateral border of the scapula. lower third of the lateral border of the scapula. And its insertion is the crest of the lesser tubercle. So it wraps around to the anterior side of the humerus. So looking at this muscle, what kind of actions?
Flexion.
Shoulder adduction.
Adduction, yes. Shoulder flexion, no.
No. Medial rotation.
Medial rotation, very good.
Extension of the shoulder.
Extension of the shoulder. So we have extension of the shoulder, medial rotation of the shoulder, and
And
adduction.
Adduction.
Yes.
So is it
AD.
based on the origin point that it would do? Because the origin is on the posterior side.
When
Is that
muscles
why it does
contract, when muscles contract, they pull the insertion toward the origin. So when we start in neutral, when the insertion is pulled, the arm will rotate medially. Back to neutral. Once the arm is abducted, now that muscle will contract to adduct it.
Okay.
Right? And when we turn to the side, the insertion is anterior, the origin is posterior. So when we pull the insertion towards the origin, the humerus will move posteriorly. That is extension. Good stuff?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good stuff. Now, one more thing I just want to say. When we say this muscle's action is extension, this is going to be a synergist. This is going to be a Robin. There are bigger muscles that are going to be the Batman, right? The prime mover for extension would be something like posterior deltoid or triceps. Larger muscles will be your prime movers. These smaller little pipsqueak muscles, they only ever get to be a Robin. You guys understand me?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Next muscle that we want to cover, latissimus dorsi. What do we remember about latissimus dorsi?
I have like 5 origins and 1 insertion and like only 3 actions. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. So I'm going to go back to my full body model here. Come on. So here is latissimus dorsi. It originates along spinous processes, along the thoracolumbar aponeurosis. Lots and lots of origins. Only 1 insertion though. It inserts on the intertubercular groove, the groove between the tubercles. So again, just like teres major, it's positioned kind of the same. It is much larger, but the basic position is about the same. So we will get actions like medial rotation. We will get actions like extension, and we will get adduction. Latissimus dorsi and teres major. Remember, those two are the old married couple. They are complete synergists to each other. They do everything together. That was also the 2 muscles that put you in the handcuff position. Remember, like if you're getting arrested, extension, medial rotation, and adduction. Last muscle, coracobrachialis. Coracobrachialis.
Its origin is the coracoid process of the scapula.
Perfect. Perfect. Insertion.
It's the midway down.
Meaning
the
where some the humerus.
Midpoint along the shaft of the humerus. Very good. There it is. Coracoid process of the scapula to about the midline of the medial aspect of the radius. And what about its actions?
I thought it was a humerus.
Oh my God, what did I say?
Radius.
No, yeah, I screwed it up. No, not radius. It's definitely humerus. Sorry, my fault. This is the humerus. Yes. I promise I teach kinesiology for a living. Okay.
No, we're pretty
Coracoid process of the scapula to about the midpoint of the humerus. So this muscle crosses the shoulder on the anterior side. What are its actions?
Adduction,
Adduction,
flexion.
flexion. Very good. Adduction and flexion. Super duper, guys. Okay. So the next topic that I want to cover are different types of contraction. Now, before we start reading the slide and getting into the technical stuff, I want to take a moment and just explain a couple of things about muscle contractions. So what we are talking about is the chemical aspect of the chemistry of a muscle contraction has begun. So the muscle contracts. The best way that I can explain the types of contractions is actually to walk us through a flow chart. I really like flow charts. So at the beginning of our flow chart, we are going to begin with an assumption. We assume that the muscle actually contracted, okay? So the muscle contracts. The first question we have to answer is, did the muscle change its length? This is a yes or no question. Either the muscle changed its length or it did not. So we have our yes and our no. So if the muscle did change its length, then the next question is, did the muscle get shorter or did the muscle get longer? Now, our common sense says, well, when the muscle contracts, it got shorter, right? This is generally what we are talking about when we say muscle contraction, right? The bicep crosses the elbow joint, the muscle contracts or gets shorter, and so the elbow bends. That's the way muscles work. This type of contraction, the classical contraction, the kind you are usually thinking about when you think of a muscle contraction, this is called a concentric contraction. And the way I like to remember this is concentric contracts. It got shorter. But remember, guys, we also have a second option here. The muscle could contract, but it gets longer instead of shorter. This is what we refer to as an eccentric contraction. And the way I like to remember this one is eccentric elongates. The muscle contracts, but it gets longer instead of shorter. Now, to put this into a little bit of perspective, as to like give you an example as to how a muscle contracts but gets longer, let's take a very simple example. And you might have to get up from your desk and kind of move around a little bit. On the front of your thigh is a large group of muscles called the quadriceps. Their primary action is to straighten the knee, okay? So when you go into a squat, the knee is bending, so the quadriceps need to lengthen in order to allow the knee to bend. When the quadriceps gets shorter, the knee begins to straighten. So if you were to stand up and start to go into a squat, you don't have to do the full squat, but start to squat down and feel the muscles on the front of your thigh. Feel those quadricep muscles. You will feel they are engaged. They are contracted. But as you keep going down into the squat, bending the knee further and further, these muscles are having to lengthen longer and longer to allow the knee to bend deeply. But even if you get all the way down to the floor and you feel your quadriceps, they are engaged, they are contracted. This is an eccentric contraction. The muscle is contracted, but it is getting longer instead of getting shorter. Good stuff so far. Good stuff. Now, both of these contraction types, since the muscle did change its length, any contraction where the muscle changes its length is known as an isotonic contraction. An isotonic contraction. So isotonic simply means the muscle contracted and it changed its length in one way or another. If it got shorter, that is concentric. If it got longer, that is eccentric. Both of these are isotonic. Now we go to our second option. What if the muscle contracted, but it did not change its length? If it did not change its length, it is known as an isometric. The prefix iso means same or equal. Here, what we are saying is this was a muscle contraction of equal measure or of equal length. The muscle stayed the same length at rest and in contraction. To give you an example of an isometric contraction, think about what would happen if you waddled out to your car and you got your hands under the edge of the car and you tried to lift it up. And you squeeze and you push and you really, really try, but your muscles are not strong enough to lift a car. The muscle contracted. Your muscles are engaged. They are doing their best, but the load of the car is more than the power of your muscles. So the muscle contracts, but it does not change length. Imagine trying to push over a building. Your muscles are contracting, but the building does not move. That is an isometric contraction. To give you a more real world example of an isometric contraction, consider simply standing up without really moving. Small muscles throughout your spine and in your hips and in your legs have to engage in small, low-level contractions just to balance you around, right? Just to stand up straight requires certain muscles to fire, little bits all over the body, just to maintain your erect posture. Those are isometric contractions. Right. So small muscle contractions that just keep you standing up. Isometric contractions. Good stuff so far. Everybody, good stuff. Cool. So now, first kind of contraction, isometric. That is no movement, or what the word is telling you is same length. The M stands for, it has the M for no movement. I don't understand that. Just follow what I'm telling you, right? Isometric is same length or same measure. The muscle is the same length at rest and in contraction. The muscle did not change length. There could be not enough tension to overcome the resistance. That is, it's too heavy for you to lift. The resistance of the object is greater than the tension that your muscle can produce. You're not strong enough. The distance between the origin and the insertion remains the same. Therefore, the muscle fibers stay the same length, even though they are contracting. Yeah. So for example, the Olympics with the gymnastic ring, when you've got your hands in those rings and you push yourself up and you hold, that's another example of an isometric contraction. Good stuff, good stuff. Concentric, the muscle shortens, the tension overcomes the resistance. So my bicep is stronger than my little weight, so the resistance is less than the tension, and the arm moves just like it's supposed to. Eccentric, the muscle lengthens. So the insertion moves away from the origin while the muscle contracts. So the muscle fibers actually become longer while contracting. Next up, range of motion. Let me ask you this first. Is everybody exposed to range of motion before in a previous class? Active range of motion, passive range of motion. So this is a review and a recap rather than a new concept.
Correct.
Cool.
It's new to me, but
Perfect. Nope,
whatever.
then that's perfect. So range of motion, what we are describing is the expected amount of movement at some joint. And that movement is going to be measured in degrees. So we would say the elbow, for example, when it is fully flexed, that's about 20 degrees. And when it is fully extended, that is a straight line, that's 180 degrees. So we would expect the range of motion for the elbow to be between 20 and 180 degrees. When someone is dealing with some kind of musculoskeletal issue, usually one of the things that they are complaining about is that they can't move their limb as much as they're supposed to be able to. That is a reduced range of motion. So you'll see people with a shoulder injury and they'll say, I can only raise my shoulder up to here. That's as high as it goes. This shoulder is supposed to be able to go all the way up. So they have lost 90 degrees range of motion, right? Range of motion is always going to be observed active first. What active range of motion means is the client does the movement by themselves. So I stand to one side, they stand apart from me, and I say to them, raise your arm like this. And the client raises their arm like this. And then I see what they are capable of doing. Whereas passive range of motion usually will happen maybe on a massage table, where the client goes passive. I like to say ragdoll style. They are meant to turn it all off. And the therapist assumes the full weight of their limb. So we grab the arm and we move it through a range of motion with no assistance from the client. You take the full weight of the limb in your hands and you move the limb through its range of motion. And you see how much range you get. Generally, active and passive will give you different amounts. And which one gives you more gives you important clues as to what the actual problem is. One of the key points here is that you should be moving the limb through a range of motion that is pain-free. So if they say, I can only bring it up to here, and you try to push it more, and they say, ow, that means you stop. Capiche? Capiche. The objective here is to witness or measure their pain-free range of motion. And then through massage, what we are aiming to do is increase that range of motion that is pain-free. So the ultimate goal being you restore full movement with no pain. Now, usually you'll be able to accomplish that goal. Sometimes you will not be able to accomplish that goal for various reasons, but that's usually the chief goal. So some things to consider about range of motion. Doing massage loosens up the muscles. And if they are not so tight, they won't restrict movement as much. So you want to assess before the massage and after the massage. Again, hoping you see an improvement after the massage. That's the goal. You want to check active range of motion first, because that shows the client's willingness to be able to move through a range of motion. Generally, they may be guarding an injury, so they don't want to move it, so they don't risk hurting it more. Always let the client, inform the client they need to tell you if there's any pain or discomfort in the movement, because that's what sets the boundaries of the thing. If they can move their arm all the way up, but it hurts when they do this, then they don't need to do that, right? They move it up to where the pain starts. That is the limit of your range of motion. Check passive range of motion until you get to a comfortable stretch, but no pain. So you may passively, move the arm a little beyond what it's supposed to be, and they're like, yeah, I feel a stretch in there, but it should not be painful. Always check bilaterally, right? You check one shoulder, then you check the other shoulder. And then check all movements of the joint. Don't just see if they can abduct. You got to check and see if they can flex and extend, and medial rotation, lateral rotation, circumduction. Take the joint through all of its ranges of motion for all of its movements, right? So for an elbow, An elbow joint has 4 basic movements: extension, flexion, and then you have pronation and supination. This is a rotational movement that happens at the forearm. This is not the same as medial and lateral rotation of the shoulder, right? You see the whole arm is rotating from the shoulder, only the elbow rotates with pronation, supination. Those are your 4 basic elbow movements. So you want to measure, stick the thumb out, you should be able to get 180 degrees from one side to the other of pronation, supination. You should be able to get flexion into about 20 degrees or so, and extension to a full straight line. If this muscle is tight, they will not be able to fully extend. The joint will stay flexed to some degree. That's the range of motion that you're trying to add. Everybody follow me? You picking up what I'm putting down?
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, on to the meat of what we're getting onto today. We are looking primarily rotator cuff muscles. So like I was saying to you guys, the rotator cuff is not a structure, it's a muscle group. There are 4 muscles in the rotator cuff. So when a client tells you, I tore my rotator cuff, the appropriate question is, which one? And if they say the left one, that is still not a full answer. You are looking for the specific name of the muscle or muscles that they tore. They likely did not tear all 4 at once, although if they did, that was a magnificent injury. They were very lucky. So we've gone through the actions of the shoulder enough at this point. We understand flexion and extension, AB, adduction, medial and lateral rotation, and circumduction, which is like a big arm circle. It's a combination of all of those movements. The first muscle we are going to look at for today is supraspinatus. Side note, I love the names of the rotator cuff muscles. The names tell you exactly what is going on with them. I love it. The supraspinatus originates in the supraspinous fossa of the scapula. So you can even wrap your arm over the top of your shoulder, feel for the spine of the scapula. It'll be right about here. It's a slender, bony ridge. Now let your fingers slide superior and you'll find a thick, kind of a ropey chunk of a muscle just resting right above the spine of the scapula. This is supraspinatus. You will feel the belly of the muscle on the shoulder blade, but as you move towards the lateral edge, you'll lose the fibers. They dip under the acromion. So right when you find the bony acromion, you'll lose supraspinatus. If you keep going, you can just feel its little tendon attaching to the greater tubercle of the humerus. So visualize, this muscle sits on the top of the shoulder, attaching to the top of the humerus. It only gets one action. When this muscle contracts, it pulls the head of the humerus into abduction. It is an abductor. So, despite the fact that it is a rotator cuff muscle, the supraspinatus does not, in fact, rotate anything. It only abducts. Now, the trail guide lists a second action. It says that it stabilizes the humeral head. So it stabilizes the shoulder. I am going to be a little bit of a nitpicky butthole here and say, guys, every muscle stabilizes the joint that it crosses. They all do that. The trail guide doesn't add that into the actions of every other muscle, but every muscle, by contracting isometrically, will serve to stabilize whatever joint it is crossing. So I am not going to make a huge deal about that being the action listed for these muscles. Abduction, you absolutely need to know. Stabilization of the humeral head is not an action that I'm going to sweat. Capiche? Capiche. Every muscle stabilizes its joint. That's what they do. So that's not a proper action, right? the other, my other nitpick is stabilization is not an action that we've talked about. We've talked about flexion and abduction and medial rotation. None of those said stabilize. So that's not an action. Mm-mm. So the trapezius is the most superficial. So we have to remove the trapezius in order to see what's below it. And there sits your supraspinatus muscle. To isolate it. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a question.
Of course.
When you palpate this muscle, you need to use the thumbs in the way to touch deeper.
You can. Yeah, you can use fingertips though. You can use
This
fingertips.
one too. I mean, because you say it's under the trapezius. So how we can?
So when you're palpating, you're going to feel through the trapezius. You're just going to press deeper.
Deeper, right?
And yes, push a little bit harder to push through the trapezius, and then abduct the shoulder, and you should feel this muscle contract under your fingers.
Okay.
And you kind of
Thank you.
roll your fingers around in a circle so that you can find the edges of it. You can really kind of outline where the muscle sits. And we're
Okay.
going to do this in hands-on this week too. We're going to get our hands on shoulders and trace these guys out. Yep.
Thank you.
So supraspinatus begins in the supraspinous fossa of the scapula. It crosses the shoulder joint on the superior aspect, and it inserts onto the greater tubercle of the humerus. Its action is abduction. Now, let me get rid of the deltoid. There we go. The next muscle is infraspinatus. The infraspinatus originates in the infraspinous fossa of the scapula. It is just inferior to that bony ridge. This is another thick, chunky muscle stuck right on the surface of the scapula. This muscle crosses the shoulder on the posterior side, coming in to also insert on the greater tubercle of the humerus. So its primary action, if you look at where this muscle is sitting, when it pulls on the humerus, it is not going to pull it into abduction. It's going to pull it into more of a rotation. That is, since it's pulling from the backside, it will be a lateral rotation. It will pull into lateral rotation.
Does it not do extension of the shoulder because it's like too flat?
Its fibers are too horizontal for it to do extension. It would need more angular fibers like teres major or lat dorsi, but it's not quite at a good enough angle. Do you notice here, like right over the joint, those fibers become pretty horizontal.
Mm-hmm.
So those will pull into a rotational movement, but they're not going to pull into an angular movement.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
The other aspect of this is once the arm has been abducted, it horizontally will abduct. So starting, contracting, horizontal abduction. So we can watch this muscle do, whoa, I'm way zoomed in. Lateral rotation. So first the arm has to be medially rotated, and then we pull, and then extra. And the next action is going to be horizontal abduction. Good stuff.
Good stuff.
Good stuff. So infraspinatus, infraspinous fossa of the scapula, posterior aspect, greater tubercle of the humerus. It does lateral rotation.
In the trail guide, it says adduction.
So once the arm is AB ducted, then like this, regular traditional
Yeah.
adduction.
Okay. It doesn't say lateral rotation.
Yes,
in
it
the-
does. It doesn't say horizontal.
Oh, it doesn't say
adduction.
horizontal.
Yep.
Yes, I meant.
For the purposes of this class, we will always default to the trail guide,
Okay.
not over my app. But we'll stick with this one. So there is infraspinatus. It's a cute, chunky little muscle. All right, next we have teres minor. Please do not let the name fool you. The teres minor and teres major were twins separated at birth. They have nothing to do with each other. They just have the same last name. That's all they have in common. The name teres describes their shape. So you have the larger one and the smaller one. But these guys live their own separate lives, okay? Teres minor is part of the rotator cuff group. Teres major is the old married couple with lat dorsi. These guys do not do the same things. Teres minor originates on the upper 2/3 of the lateral border, so it is more superior than its counterpart. It also shares an insertion with the infraspinatus muscle at the posterior aspect of the greater tubercle of the humerus. Because it shares the same insertion, they will share very similar actions, such as lateral rotation, adduction, and I promise you, horizontal abduction, but I will let that one go for now. So there is teres minor. And just for context, there is teres major. Teres major inserted on the anterior humerus, which made it a medial rotator. Teres major inserts on the posterior humerus, making it a lateral rotator. These guys do not do the same things. They went two different directions in life. Good stuff.
Will teres minor only be a synergist? Probably. Okay.
Yeah. Our last muscle in this group is subscapularis. Now, subscapularis originates on the subscapular fossa. So it is sandwiched between the scapula and the ribs. You have to really kind of wing their scapula and get like your fingers underneath the shoulder blade in order to get your fingers on this muscle. It is the only rotator cuff muscle that inserts on the lesser tubercle. All the other three insert on the greater tubercle. It is also the only rotator cuff muscle that inserts on the anterior side of the humerus, making it the only one capable of medial rotation. Right? So supraspinatus was only an abductor. It did not rotate. Infraspinatus and teres minor are lateral rotators. Subscapularis is the one medial rotator. And that's its action. It medially rotates. Ta-da! So, quick recap. The rotator cuff muscles also called the sits group, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. Supraspinatus originates in the supraspinous fossa. Insert on the greater tubercle. It is an abductor. Infraspinatus originates on the infraspinous fossa. Inserts also on the greater tubercle. It is a lateral rotator. And an adductor. Teres minor originates upper 2/3 of the lateral border of the scapula. It also inserts at the greater tubercle of the humerus. It is also a lateral rotator and an adductor. Subscapularis originates on the subscapular fossa of the scapula. It's the only one that inserts on the lesser tubercle of the humerus, which is on the anterior side, making it a medial rotator. Any questions so far?
Dave, can you talk a little bit more about what's in between the scapula and the ribs? Like I know subscapularis is there, but are there other muscles under there? Is there fascia? Like what's going on?
There are other muscles. So here we've got rhomboids, but they don't go under the scapula. So I'm going to take these away. This muscle also kind of inserts along the medial border. It doesn't really go under it. This is serratus posterior superior. You probably know its cousin, serratus anterior, that rib-looking muscle. That's its cousin. Serratus posterior superior. There's also serratus posterior inferior in the lower back under lat dorsi. So there. Anyway, there's levator scapula. So there is subscapularis, right? You're just looking at the side that's usually attached to the scapula. We're going to take this away, and there is serratus anterior. That's the only muscle besides subscapularis. When you take this muscle away, now you're at ribs. Good question. But yeah, what's under the scapula? Subscapularis, serratus anterior, and then ribs. Okay, those are all the muscles for this week, just the 4. So this Thursday, this week in class, I need to see the muscle cards from last week. Deltoid, pec major, those muscle cards are what I want to see this week. Next week, we'll have another online lecture on Monday. Thursday, when we come into class, I want to see the rotator cuff muscle cards. Good stuff? Good stuff. Okay. I just want to spend the last few minutes that we have. I want you guys to pay attention watching these muscles perform their actions. So we'll start with supraspinatus. Its only action is abduction. Notice the reason that its action is limited is because of where it's inserting on the humerus. It's inserting right on the top, so it can only pull outward, right? If it was attached more on the front, maybe we could get some flexion, or if it was attached more on the back, maybe we could get a little extension. But as it sits, let's look at the side view. because of where that muscle sits, inserting right at the top aspect of the greater tubercle, it really can only pull out like this. Okay. The next muscle I want to look at is infraspinatus. Its primary action is lateral rotation. Lateral rotation. So what I hope that we start to see is we can look at the muscle and think about those muscle tips that I gave you guys, right? Because the muscle crosses the joint on the posterior side, because the muscle's inserting more posterior, it's going to create lateral rotation. If we were to look at the next muscle, subscapularis, subscapularis inserts on the anterior side. Because it's inserting on the anterior side, it will create medial rotation when that muscle shortens. And we see the same thing with teres minor. Because it's inserting on the posterior humerus, when the muscle shortens, it will pull into a lateral rotation. Good stuff, guys. Questions?
Great stuff.
Great. Yay.
Do we have a quiz this week?
I believe there's a quiz almost every week. Quizzes
Okay.
are on Moodle.
And it's due this next
If
week.
I'm not much mistaken, and let me verify before I open my mouth, but I prefer quizzes to be due before we come to class. That's usually when I like them to be set. But this one closes. Is this quiz one? Closes Tuesday, October 12th at 8 a.m. I feel
So
like that's a
next-
long way away.
Next Monday?
Next Tuesday.
And the quizzes are just on Moodle?
Correct.
You said Tuesday?
No, I don't think that these dates are correct.
Yeah,
Because now quiz.
Mondays and Thursdays, but just thinking. How is that worse?
I'm going to change these dates in Moodle. I'm gonna have to do them one at a time. I want quizzes to be due by Thursday when we come to class. So the deadlines will be Thursday at 2:30. I'm gonna have to go through all of the quizzes and change them though.
So is quiz 1 due by Thursday or is quiz 2 due by Thursday?
It would be quiz 1 due this Thursday. So you guys
Okay.
would have about 3 days.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay.
Quiz 2 closes Monday, October 11th. That also doesn't make sense. Yeah. Yeah, rule of thumb. Tuesday or Thursday before you come to class. You need the quiz to be completed and muscle cards ready to go. One of the students in the class asked me, how can I accept muscle cards? Can I accept them digitally? So if you submit like photos of them on Moodle, I will accept those. You can also bring your actual physical cards into class and let me see them, and that counts. So I will take them however you can get them to me. That's fine. One more thing, another student pointed out to me that on Moodle, the muscle tips page was that I had put on there was my old one, not my new fancy, prettier, updated one. So I fixed that. So let me show you what I mean. So now when you go in, it says study packet muscle tips. It's my newer one. This is my updated one. I just made it look fancier. That's all. My old one looked like it was from the 90s. But all my little tips, all your little cute pictures and stuff, all those are on there. That's all. I didn't realize I had my old one still on there. Good stuff. Okay. Any more questions? Anything else we want to talk about? Okay. Study up. Thursday, when we come to class, we will be palpating rotator cuff muscles. It's going to be fun. I'll even grab China pens and we can draw the muscles on each other's shoulders. It'll be fun. All right then, guys. That's everything I have for you guys. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I will see you all on Thursday.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. See you
Bye.
Thursday.
Thank you, Dave.
See you then.
And the rotator cuff muscle cards aren't due this week, right?
Correct. This week is going to be the muscles we covered
5.
last week. Deltoid, pec major, 5.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to
Next week.
sorry, thank
Yes.
you.
Next week, I want your 4 rotator cuffs.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.
Perfect. Bye.
All right. Thank you.
My
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Have a good day, Gloria.